There you go. Recording. They'll tell you. All right. Hello, Christian. Hope you're doing well. So let's start with some general questions. I guess can you give us or me specifically? There's no us here. Basic like you know introduction, like who you are, hobbies, any other relevant information.
Okay. Well, hello, whoever views this online or wherever you find yourself viewing things. I'm Christian Zenz. I primarily go by the title of author and spoken word artist and poet. I'm both a fiction writer and primarily a poet that has to do with virtually any topics. I'll write about pretty much anything, whether that's experiences I go through or experiences that others are going through that I'm simply observing or making my own assumptions about and stuff like that and my own judgments. Um, that's the title that I particularly like to portray on the internet and whatever socials I have. But of course, I'd like to think there's more to me than just that. Um, for instance, I am an avid collector of Lego. Um, in the back, I've got a giant mural of a Formula One car that my grandmother painted. My grandmother is a big inspiration for my artistry, by the way. I'm a fan of racing, architecture, um, the outdoors, the city of Milwaukee. Um, Lots of things really just fascinate me. And it's been that way for most of my life. Things have always been, relatively interesting to me. I've always loved discovering new things, especially in terms of new ways of thinking, which is particularly why I became a philosophy minor recently. And I should have that finished by the end of this fall semester. Speaking of that, I'm also an English major. Um, that probably makes sense. And I might be able to graduate with my 4 year by this spring. That's a little bit about me.
Interesting, interesting. All right. I guess did you always want to be a English major?
So, writing and to a somewhat less degree, reading has always been a fascinating thing to me. I've always enjoyed doing both. Um, when I was a elementary student, our teachers, I was part of what was called the Next Generation Learning Community. I don't really know if that's still a thing anymore, but my teachers would give me notebooks, and they would give all the students notebooks, and it was basically just a free free will creative writing journal. You could do whatever you would like with it. You could, use it as a diary. You could write nonfiction observations in there. You could light it on fire if you wanted to. I took that to heart, and I just, with a pen, I set it ablaze. I would fill those out with all the free time that I had, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I wrote nonfiction pieces about just things that I knew about, and I would also create just silly fictional stories and stuff. Um, so I've always liked writing from the very beginning. A lot of my writing inspiration stemmed from my love of music and lyricism. I grew up with a lot of music. I grew up with listening to my dad's music and all those lyrics and stuff. So the element of poetry was always there, but I didn't start taking poetry seriously until about 3 years ago. And that has really been my primary focus since. Of course, I still write fiction a good amount, um, but I wasn't entirely sure that I wanted that to be my primarily educational focus. When I first started college, I always knew that I wanted to go to college, but I never really had a concrete idea of what I was going to study. So I just took general education courses, and in the back of my head, I always knew that that was going to be prevalent. And lo and behold, that is what became the um, the main thing for me was writing. and I officially declared my major earlier this year. Yeah.
Mm, interesting. All right. So you mentioned, I guess, your mom, I mean, no, both your grandma and your dad about like being inspirations for like your writing. Like, I guess, like, what's your family dynamic like? Are they very like creative people?
Family dynamic. Um, my on my mom's side, my grandma and grandfather, they were both very artistic people. Um, they both got art degrees from UW Milwaukee, actually. Um, my grandfather, he's no longer with us, but he primarily did sculpture work. And my grandma is still an avid artist in her home, and she creates everything from drawings to paintings to collage work. Um, we like to joke around that the artist gene in the family kind of
Mhm.
skipped a generation. Um, my mother is not primarily a creative person. She's a bit more analytical, a bit more statistical, a little bit more scientific in that regard, and that's probably partially why she became a veterinarian. And my dad was a race car driver, and that's primarily what he wanted to do. But he came from a family of doctors, so he definitely rebelled in a creative manner. And he's always had a love of music and a love of art on a more casual level as well. So all of those influences really kind of coalesced and created what I um, became today. Uh, Not really a direct kind of inspiration from a writing standpoint. Um, Again, that sort of arose out of the music that I was listening to. The lyricism in songs and hip hop and things like that when I was younger. It was the only thing that I primarily understood about the art. So I just honed in on that,
Mhm.
basically.
I guess, what was it like growing up surrounded by all these like creative people?
Um, can you repeat the question?
I asked what was it like growing up around a bunch of these like creative family
Oh,
members?
yeah. Um, it was a good environment, definitely, and it still proves to be a great environment. Um, Parents were adamant that I kind of let myself guide on my own. Um, they were never really, adamant that I did this or I thought about things in this way. Um, they really just utilized their presence as a guidance for me to select my own role in this world. Um, and I didn't really, you know, I've always had the element of my grandmother's art riveting and moving around in the back of my head. But it didn't really become prevalent in the way that it is now until again a few years ago. Um, I in December 2021 was when I put together my first serious poetry book titled Deadly Grievances, and it needed a cover. And who better to turn to than my own grandmother for some artistic inspiration and some creativity, especially because she knows me better than, say, a random artist that I could employ from elsewhere to create this. And that cover was primarily um her thing, but we worked on it together and I really like how it turned out. Um, so the artistic presence has always been there, and it's always kind of been subconsciously swimming inside of me. But it really has become more prevalent over the past few years, especially since the pandemic started and since I've entered college.
Well, circling back to your poetry, I guess, what do you like to write about?
So that like similar to the beginning question, the very first question, I'll write up whatever comes to mind, pretty much anything. Um, and I'm always looking to write about more interesting subjects and things like that. Um, Deadly Grievances is primarily a romantic piece, a piece that represents, the heartbreak and the heartache I was going through at the time. Um, in retrospect, the title has pretty much aged well because, there were grievances about a relationship that had died. And my goodness, they can indeed be deadly in a sense, because I read that now and I still enjoy what I read. I still think it's legitimate and powerful and such like that. But I no longer particularly resonate or agree with it in a sense. Um, and that is just because I've had a new sense of clarity that has developed over the years regarding that whole situation. And I've had a lot of forgiveness and a lot of acceptance since that time. And when I was creating that book, um, I did not have those feelings. I, yeah, I felt, I felt deserted and I felt cheated out of something that I saw potential for good in. And I just simply didn't understand what the deal was. Um, Looking back now, I can totally understand it. But creating that piece, that entire book, was definitely something that I needed to do in order to get to this healthier mindset. Um, that book just primarily talks about those topics, along with a few others about, corruption of the holiday season and things like that. A little bit of climate changes in there as well. A little bit of getting over the self and as well. And then the second poetry book that I have released is entitled Vernacular Whirlwind. That came out March 2023. And in a complete twist of events where Deadly Grievances deals primarily with um, me, myself, and I, and changes I went through and things like that. Vernacular Whirlwind is primarily my observances, usually in the third person, of a bunch of other things that are happening, whether those things are happening to my parents or my friends or to the world in general. Um, Really, it's an ode to everyone that I've met and everyone that I've known, like been very familiar with, or just a little familiar with, or someone I thought I knew, but it turns out I don't. Um, the whole idea behind that book is that everyone has their own little bit of vernacular, their own little way of communicating things, their own particular way of voicing their themselves, their feelings, their vices and virtues and such. And essentially, that book is my own vernacular, my take on the world that surrounds me and stuff like that. And the overarching theme or the overarching motif that we like to say is the weather and how an imminent storm is brewing with all the political um, global tension that has been brewing for so long. And we can start to see the water begin to boil over the pot in places like the Middle East and Ukraine and things like that. So I really tried to hone in on those topics in that second book. Other than that, my poetry is about anything goes regarding my poetry. And then for fiction, I'm primarily, I like to think I'm a realistic fiction author, but my first novel is titled 2050, and that's primarily a science fiction novel. Um, but I'm more so the realist in that regard.
You seem like you mentioned your poetry is like books. Are you like considering like a long term like career and like being like a sort of like writer figure?
Ideally, that is what I'd like to do. For a living, if I can make a living off of doing what I love, which is, writing books, whether that's poetry or fiction or anything of that sort, I will gladly take it. Um, I have other aspirations and such, of course. I've really developed a passion for baking and cooking recently, especially this year, as well as nutrition. Um, and I would love to have my own kind of cafe in some capacity in the future if the whole writing thing doesn't really work out. Um, I'm also open to teaching and in especially in the professor level for English or poetry. Um, it seems like my poetry and writing professors have a good time doing that. So I'd be open to doing that as well. Um, but similar to what I was referring to near the beginning of the interview, I have all these interests that crop up and manifest at random, and can you continue to do so over time. Geology, architecture, various things like that. I'd like to take all of these interests that I have and kind of put them into the melting pot a little bit. And that's kind of where the cafe idea comes from. I can take the architecture and the business and the cooking and such and pour it all into something that is uniquely my own product. And just a little bit more about it. Um, I live in West Dallas, which is a
Mm,
suburb of Milwaukee, just to the west of the city. And West Dallas has a very, unique, gritty blue collar history. Um, very much rooted in former industry. We are known as the Rust Belt nowadays. And by default, there's a lot of bars in West Dallas, which is fine. It's Wisconsin. What do we expect? Um, but I'm not particularly a fan of alcohol, and I would love to create a place where people can go without having to necessarily consume alcohol to have a good time. And that's kind of what I want to create with the cafe, a place where people can, eat something that they'd want to, drink something that they'd want to, without any of the guilt or consequence that arises from it. And ideally, this cafe would also have a little stage in front where people could share poetry or writing, create like an open mic event, like host an open mic at this place as well. There's a very similar place that largely inspired this idea, called the Student Union in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Um, they primarily just do music open mics now, not really poetry anymore, but that's where I did my first open mic shows for poetry. And I really like it there, and I'd love to go there and perform again one day.
interesting. And another question related to poetry. What do you want people to like get from you when they listen to or read your poetry? Like, what are you trying to get across to them?
So when I I mean, honestly, I primarily write poetry just for my own venting first and foremost. I feel like that's what most poets do. They're writing to, express a feeling or express an emotion or some other equivalent, um, just for the sake of itself. Um, but I do have a passion for sharing these out loud. I go to every single lyrical sanctuary and I share it every single one. And I'm always looking to perform in places wherever I am and such. Um, and that just stems from the idea that, um, I want people to know that, he's at least thinking about stuff.
Mm.
People can interpret my work in whatever way they'd like to. That's the beauty behind poetry and the slight bit of abstraction that I like to include in my work. People can take whatever they'd like out of it and people can give it its own meaning. That's something I really enjoy doing with song lyrics when I find them. Who the hell knows what the songwriter or the singer was talking about when he
Mm.
wrote those lyrics? It's probably something that only he or she knows about, truly. But I have my own interpretation of it, and so does everyone else that has read those lyrics. Um, at the end of the day, all I want people to get out of it is that he's thinking through it and he's, making assessments about the world around him in a
Mm,
creative way. Um, I guess the sole purpose of the performing is to simply just entertain, go up there, and try to instill confidence and um, just for a blip, yank people out of the reality that is always in front of them.
mm. Do you like? I was gonna ask something really to entertain. Hold on, I'm forming the question in my brain right now. Do you? I guess like, what do you like about like spoken word pieces? It seems just like something you enjoy.
So in spoken, not all spoken word, I would consider some form of poetry, but not all poetry is spoken word.
Mm,
Um, there's just some pieces that are meant to be shared out loud, and I particularly really enjoy making pieces that are meant that sound good out loud. Um, I can recall the first moment that I was enthralled by spoken word. Um, I was still at the Milwaukee branch campus, UWM at Waukesha, and the 2020 Wisconsin Poet Laureate Dasha Kelly Hamilton came in and she was sharing some of her material, um, doing a book talk or a craft talk or something like that. And she just impromptu out of the blue shared one of her pieces, and I was like, "Holy shoot, man, that is so cool!" Um, the idea of spoken word is that it's uplifting and it's powerful, and again, it just yanks people out of the everyday mundane and gives them something else to ponder, something else that they might be familiar with, or something that they might be totally brand new to them. And seeing that really inspired me to take the poetry I was creating to an even more serious regard. Um, Seeing her perform impromptu is like, oh my God, I wish I could do that. I I bet I can do that. I think I can do that. And then like 2 weeks later only I was doing my first open mic and it went pretty well as far as rookie open mics go.
mm.
So that particular that particular moment really inspired me. And it really showcased just how powerful spoken word is and just the kind of impact it can have on an audience because poetry that you have in front of you on online on the Poetry Foundation or in a book that you might have, you it's there and you're reading it to yourself and you can reread that to yourself as many times as you'd like. um but with spoken word, it's live, it's in there in the moment, and it sticks with you. um that's my cat, she's on my lap. um and it's a bit like a concert in that regard. You might hear songs that you know by heart, but it's always going to be unique. It's always going to hit just a little different when it's live.
Mm.
Yeah.
I guess that leads me to the question. But no, there's no lead in. Uh, I was thinking of a follow-up question, but I was
No,
simply
no worries, man.
no. So then I guess we might have gone over this already, but I do have the question of what is one thing or maybe a bunch of things that inspire you?
One thing or many things that inspire me. Um, the leading motif, I said this already, but in vernacular one is the weather. I find that the weather and seasons very much inspire me and very much direct my way of thinking and my way of living and such. Um, I had a lot of, I've been blessed to have a lot of experiences regarding Native American teachings and courses. Back at Waukesha, I took environmental science 284, and it was essentially studying, Native Americans of Wisconsin and there was also an interview where a University of Michigan professor named Kyle White came to the Waukesha campus. And both of those classes kind of showed both him and that class kind of just showed me how intertwined and how deep the relationship is between indigenous people and the weather and seasons. And using the seasons and the weather as a guide, I think is something that more people should look to do. Um, it's really helped me be in tune with myself and the climate that surrounds me. It also makes life a bit easier in that regard. Kind of takes the choice out of it. There's no longer the wish that it could be hotter or colder or different. You're kind of just enjoying the current time for what it is, the current season, the current moment for what it is. And I talk about the weather a lot by default in my poetic work. Um, I love weather. I love thunderstorms. I think thunderstorms are so freaking cool. Um, I get all giddy like a little kid still. When, the gust front comes through and all the trees start to dance and then that first crack of thunder. Um, as long as the roof over my head isn't under threat, I will always get excited for storms. It's a bit like the prototypical Midwestern dad who, when there's a tornado warning, the dad goes outside to the porch and he's like, yeah, there it is. I guess I'm like that in a way with weather, but in summary, weather is one of my biggest inspirations, just for living in general. And of course, with weather comes nature as well, just the natural beauty that surrounds me. I was fortunate enough to go up to Upper Michigan this past weekend, and it was the first time that I've been there in like 7 years or something like that. And I still remember it from all those years ago when I was in middle school or something like that. And it was great to see a relatively unchanged landscape in a new light. Um, it's very open, it's very empty, but there's still a good sense of community up there. Um, and there's nothing like going to the Northwoods with the old growth pine trees and the ancient, previously volcanic rock outcroppings that you can see on the sides of the highway. I really love it up there. Um, it's beautiful, and I love the city. I'm an urban person by heart,
Yeah.
but it's always good to get away from it all once in a while and just be one with the waterfall
Yeah.
that's rippling in the background. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned during your talk about being inspired by weather that you tend to like find yourself like just taking weather as it is, not really particularly complaining about the weather, how it is. Do you often like find yourself sort of like being a person that like lives in the moment?
These days, I would say so, more so than ever in a way. Um, well, in some ways, absolutely. In other ways, not so much. Um, like, you know, I'm in Buddhist philosophy right now, and I'm not a diehard Buddhist yet by any means, but I really do think some Buddhist teachings, and a lot of what Buddhism aspires to be is very inspiring and is a great way to look at life. And I'll go through great effort to try and reach what they call nirvana. Like I'll pay good money to get lost in a concert or something and get as close as I can to the band and the sound and stuff like that. Um, or I will do my diligence through work that I might not necessarily enjoy to, get that new big Lego set
Mhm.
because those things that I enjoy allow me to, you know, turn my brain off and live in the moment of whatever it is that I'm consuming, whether it's putting something together or listening to something or something like that. Um, those are the moments that I live for. And I really just try and enjoy things for what they are, and understand that these things are fleeting. All the joys that we have are fleeting, but so is the pain that we deal with. Um, and all of it's kind of impermanent in a way. Um, I aspire for the moment, like especially with my cooking, because now I take the time to make all of my food, and I've really made the effort to savor it more than I ever have. But on the other hand, I'm also quite the planner. I'm quite the organizer when it comes to homework and reading and things like that.
Mm.
Um, I'm always asking myself, do I have everything done for tomorrow? Or is everything that I have to do done so I can be successful for the next day and the next day and so on like that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm always planning stuff out, um, ensuring that I don't forget anything. Um, in this busy state of affairs that I find myself in. Um, but at the end of the day, it's all about balance. Um, in this world, you kind of have to have a plan. You can't always live in the moment, I fear, but I feel like I'm able to appreciate the moments that I have more so than ever, and just not focus so much on getting the things done I need to do, but rather I enjoy doing them instead.
Mhm. So I guess what how do you feel? Oh wait, fair warning. Wait, I'll just get this out of the way. It looks like we have 5 minutes left. I'm just gonna post
Okay.
the link to the next Zoom call so I don't have to do this right there. Okay, you see that in the group chat?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess click on that link. I'll put us in the next Zoom call or buy some extra time because they love not giving us any time to do
Are we
Zoom.
gonna switch now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me stop the recording so I